Good day and welcome America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue for Truth Matters, Tom Donahue Reports. So glad you can be with us for this week's edition. And I left off with Trump's bonkers, bizarre White House Correspondents' Dinner, his vicious and vile attacks, the complete embarrassment he bombed. But the next day, he continued to bombard some of his targets through more memes, and the insanity just continues. Well, Monday of this week, Trump had his little rally at a GM plant, and Trump scolds a protester who called him a pedophile protector. So this is starting to occur and reoccur more often, which is a good thing, because at some point they're going to leave off the term protector. Yeah, I think more and more arrows seem to point that direction. But at the moment, we'll just use that term, pedophile protector, because he has them right there in his cabinet. Ludnick, not only was he Epstein's neighbor, and yes, a good friend, and he lied about it to Congress. And 10 years after the fact that he said he cut off all communication because he felt that Epstein was creepy. Well, he and his family visit the Epstein Island for lunch. Can you imagine taking your family to Epstein Island after these creepy feelings that you have? Yuck. Speaking of creepy, well, Senator Rand Paul is releasing the Fauci diary entries ahead of the hearing. And some of the things that are beginning to emerge, Fauci is quoted in his diary, in his own words, written words. The press is going wild with me. Hee ha ha. Isn't that just lovely? He also revealed that the wet market was not the origins of COVID. Wow. So Fauci's newly released COVID diaries revealed bizarre fixation on fame as pandemic deaths mounted. So it'll be really interesting now that these revelations have surfaced as to what will transpire in these hearings. And thank you, Senator Rand Paul, for never giving up and continuing to always forge forward in exposing this fraud, Fauci. Remember the Beagles that he had no qualms about having to be experimented on, these docile, loving, gentle creatures? Thankfully, we've got those released from Fauci's harm's way. Well, we're now learning that the reason that Trump and CENTCOM is holding off from further air attacks because of depleted defense stocks. So missile stocks are increasingly low or almost non-existent. Now, just imagine if we had a real adversary. What would we be able to do? We've already turned away many of our allies, so do you think they're going to restock us? So how would we wage a real war to defend our country, defend our national interests, if we can't even finish the job? $37.5 billion, Hegseth admits to spending on this elective by choice war. And that's probably a gross underestimate. Just imagine what we could do with nearly $40 billion. Every time I think we can put to rest R.I.P., but not really rest in peace, but rest in turmoil, it should be R.I.T. Fairy Graham, Lindsey Graham, resurfaces the ghost of Graham, and he told a film crew that Trump was jacked about the start of the Iran war. He loves blowing stuff up. Oh, isn't that lovely? So you and Trump had the giggles watching things blow up. Sadistic, sick, sinister. Graham compared Trump and Netanyahu to FDR and Churchill in new footage. The Wall Street Journal says unreleased documentary footage captures Lindsey Graham's obsessive push for the Iran war. So in this footage, they show the behind-the-scenes support for the war. Lindsey Graham called the years-long push for war with Iran the best thing I've ever done. More footage shows Lindsey Graham cheering as U.S. strikes on Iran. Also, it's reported that Trump and Netanyahu, Bibi, were pushed by Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham was involved in this triad. So the colonel of neoconism, or the general of neoconism, Lindsey Graham, made John McCain proud, and Bush and Cheney and the globalist New World Order. So Lindsey Graham, Fairy Graham, was instrumental in putting together. So it was even more Graham than Israel for this push, but it was in conjunction with Israel. And Trump loves blowing things up, according to Graham, and he was easily swayed by Israel and Graham. And, of course, the handler, Mark Levin, which I'm bringing into context here, the assistant handler, Ben Shapiro. And I forgot to mention Ted Cruz, of course, and Mike Huckabee. That's the colony of neoconism that I'd like to see flushed and plunged and extricated from our system. But that's not going to happen anytime soon because the neocons have a stranglehold on the world, and in particular, the United States of America. More to come. Hold tight. Tom Donahue, Truth Matters. You're listening to Truth Matters and Tom Donahue Reports, where the truth really does matter, shedding light and insight on the prevailing controversies, cover-ups, and conspiracies, always from an America First, patriotic, independent, conservative perspective. And be sure to listen each week at the same time. Also find out more about our show at TomDonahueReports.com, also available for podcast listen and download on all major podcast platforms. That's Tom Donahue Reports. .com. Welcome back, Tom Donahue. Truth matters. It really does. And I guess it doesn't matter to Sean Hannity. Hannity was part of the eulogy brigade for Lindsey Graham. Now, isn't it kind of odd that Sean Hannity and Levin and Beck and the whole so-called conservative broadcast, talk radio media used to always call Lindsey Graham a rhino? And you can go back on that and check. It's always good to verify. He was persona non grata in the quote-unquote conservative talk radio industry because he and John McCain were considered rhinos. But if it's a war of choice, or it's an issue of choice, then they can be forgiving and accepting and just assuming that we have amnesia and that we won't ever look back. Just like when Rush and Hannity and Levin and others thought NAFTA and GATT were great things. And they favored everything that corporate America wanted, which included shipping the jobs, cheap labor, and foreign goods. And that you could never have a tariff back then. Whoa, things have changed, right? Because they assume you're not going to go back in time and fact check them and verify, question, okay? So let's get to Hannity's latest foolish, the Jughead's remarks. I used to call him the Fred Flintstone look-alike, chinny chin chin, Jay Leno almost Jughead. But Hannity is not the brightest bulb in the drawer. Hardworking, yes. By all accounts, seemingly a nice guy to most people that have been associated with him. Not a womanizer, not a philanderer, not a sexual abuser. So he's got a lot of things going for him. Except in my view, not the most talented guy. But that's just my perspective, my take. So let me just read you right off the presses. Hannity declares that Lindsey Graham is the opposite, quote unquote, of a warmonger in his call to fully defeat Iran. Now, at least Trump is more honest about Lindsey Graham. Except he says he's a true American original, which, unless you're looking at the fairy bubble wand wandering through Disney World, that would make him somewhat original, not in the best of ways. And a closeted gay, well, that's not really that unusual in the Republican Party. Trump bluntly says during the eulogy, he says Lindsey Graham never saw a war he didn't like. And Hannity says he's not a warmonger. Trump calls into Fox News, Fox and Friends, and says Lindsey liked war. Trump notes a Graham's penchant for conflict during that interview. So Trump has said that Lindsey Graham pushed him hard on going to war with Iran. And Lindsey Graham was also in contact with the Israeli prime minister in pushing for the war. So he was a chief neocon, hardliner, warmonger. Sorry, Hannity, you absolute fool for making a statement like that. And who would have imagined a few years back that Hannity would be participating in the eulogy of Lindsey Graham, a chief rhino? So they just feel that they can redefine people, events, rewrite history for their own purposes. But Trump's at least admitting that Lindsey Graham was a warmonger. Lindsey Graham never saw a war or conflict he didn't like, pushed Trump really hard. And then Lindsey Graham, we just talked about in the prior segment, talked about how Trump loves watching things blow up. Lindsey Graham, as I mentioned, reportedly told a film crew, I guess it's going to be a documentary released, that Trump was jacked at the start of the Iran war. He loves blowing stuff up. A true American original, a patriot. Yeah, a patriot in pink with a bubble wand. And loving watch other people suit up and put their lives on the line for what? Speaking of that, there are those that are calling for Barron to suit up and serve. I mean, he's a man of monstrous proportions that could certainly be a giant among men and crush the opposition to the giant. But Barron might have some other things he's going to have to answer for besides not suiting up, not volunteering for his dad's war. And that is his association with the Tate brothers. So according to the Raw story, Barron Trump is put on notice over Tate's ties to the accused sex traffickers. And the Tate brothers are very close with Don Jr., Barron, and Papa, the president. Trump at this moment says he's not going to intervene in their extradition, but hey, look at the kind of people he's pardoned and the people that he associates with and people that he excuses. And, well, just look at the Epstein sex trafficking best friend. House Democrat calls for Barron Trump to testify before Congress on his reported ties to Andrew Tate. He's deeply involved in Trump's orbit. It's part of that manosphere. Man can do anything. It's seemingly, whether it's a Trump or a Tate, these guys think that you can take advantage of women, you can abuse women. They're to obey man at whatever cost. But as long as it's not their wife or their girlfriend or their daughter or their mother, then it's okay, because they look at women as just commodities to be taken advantage of, to be utilized. And Gavin Newsom saw it that way. Gavin Newsom, now he had come out of that relationship with his then wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, that was the Fox News anchor, and then Don Jr.'s fiance, and then he dumped her, and now she got shipped off to Greece to be the ambassador there. Well, Gavin was mayor at the time of San Francisco, just coming out of that marriage, not quite divorced yet. And the bombshell reporting on this is that the ex-lover was a subordinate that worked for Newsom, but so did her husband, because she was married. And so they had this liaison, this sordid and torrid affair. And she says in her story, she said, power does not need to coerce. But apparently she had struggled with alcohol and drugs, but they were meeting up quite often. But she was working as Newsom's appointment secretary when the affair began. And her husband was a close friend of Newsom and his chief of staff. So apparently the attraction was there, both very attractive people. this was consensual, it was voluntary, but she was still working under him, no pun intended. And so that coercive nature as relating to the power structure, there was no abuse in the sense of physical abuse. And it wasn't that he, pushed her into anything. It's just that it's just not recommended and certainly condemnable to involve yourself when you're in a higher position and someone that works for you. So it's not just the optics. It's just professionally frowned upon. I mean, how do you do that to a friend and colleague? And how do you do that to your husband? And how do you do that knowing that you could be found out because they were meeting in many, many locations and it was becoming almost an open secret? And so to flaunt that, just not a good thing. So there'll be more come out, but Trump and Clinton, among others, have made it more palatable, more acceptable when it comes to these kinds of things. So Trump is basically dropped the bar so low that this will be a blip on the screen when Newsom, and he is running for president, when it comes up. But he did acknowledge this. He did address this in 2007. So he's never been in denial, like Trump denies everything. So I think he's going to be able to skate by with this. It'll be it's a blemish, but it's not a point of no return politically. And also time seems to heal everything, doesn't it, in politics? But nevertheless, I thought I would broach that subject as well. It's amazing to me, whether you're Trump or Clinton or Newsom, how you just feel like you're untouchable. Like you can just do as you please and nothing's going to stick. And there's never going to be an accountability. There'll be no price to pay except for maybe reputationally, which is really sad. But that's the society we live in now. It is part of the political sewer, the political cesspool swamp. And it goes both ways, Republican and Democrat. And so I will cover those in power that abuse their power and that we need to shed light on those kind of things. So I'm Tom Donahue. Truth Matters. Quick break. Right back. Hold tight. Tom Donahue for best-selling Eden Pure Thunderstorm 2 air purifier uses proven oxy technology that quickly destroys viruses, odors, mold, and so much more with thousands of 5-star reviews. It really does work, and I can tell you I've used it for 8+ years. Every day. Any smell will vanish after just a few seconds with the thunderstorm being on. Odors from litter boxes, trash cans, cigarette smoke, mildew, and much more are no match for the Thunderstorm 2. The powerful thunderstorm sends out O3 molecules which seek out and destroy odors. These molecules even go behind and under furniture. Nothing can hide from the thunderstorm. Best of all, no filters ever, saving lots of money. Start enjoying your clean home again. You can save $50 on an Eden Pure Thunderstorm 2 if you click on my link at my website. Add another unit and you'll get an additional $20 off. Each additional thunderstorm you add to your cart while shopping, you'll get that additional $20 off. That's $70 for every additional one you place your order for. You must click on my link at my website to get these savings. Reiterate some of the major points. The Thunderstorm 2 proven oxy technology destroys viruses, odors, mold, mildew, cleans the air of allergy-causing particles so you can breathe easier again, freshens the scent of your home. It gets rid of any odor, whether it's litter boxes, trash cans, cigarette smoke, cooking smells, and I cook with garlic, and it works. So never breathe dirty air again in your home. No filters to buy, takes up virtually no space. It plugs directly into the wall. Very quiet, nearly silent. Great for use even in your bedrooms. It's compact even for travel. If you're staying in a hotel and you know how musty and mildewy those hotel rooms can be, Tom Donahue, Eden Pure, and you go to TomDonahueReports.com. TomDonahueReports.com. It'll take you to the Eden Pure Thunderstorm 2. All the information's there. As soon as you start clicking through the shopping cart, you'll get those discounts because you're clicking on my link. Absolutely 100% endorse this and have used it for more than 8 years. These units at the regular price is quite a deal. But then you get $50 off by simply clicking on the banner, and each additional unit, you can take another $20 off per unit. So that brings the price to $59. I don't know how they do it. It's an incredible product already. Tremendous pricing. Take advantage of this by clicking on the banner, TomDonahueReports.com, Eden Pure. It's a must-have. I use it every day and completely 100% endorse it. Welcome back, Tom Donahue, Truth Matters. We got a really short segment here, a little extra time before we get to the bottom of the hour for our station affiliates to be able to break away for their announcements and their spots. So let me get right to it. We were talking about Hannity earlier. Well, I got to see video footage of Hannity in his over-the-top eulogy for his compadre, Lindsey Graham, someone who he vehemently opposed years ago, along with John McCain, and called them rhinos. So go figure. But they also, Hannity, Rush, and the conservative brigade, they were also against nationalism, America first, fair trade versus free trade, and everything corporate and Wall Street could do no wrong. So my, how things can change and flip. And I guess they feel that we have a case of amnesia when they define whatever it is in the moment that they believe in. And then I also realize that much of the praise beyond being a warmonger, which he said he wasn't, which he is, which is obvious, even Trump says so, that it's because of his devotion to the state of Israel. And I didn't know Hannity was hardcore devotee and puts Israel above all things, just like Ted Cruz, just like Mike Huckabee. And it's a really sad thing to witness, but that's the reality. Well, we're going to be getting into the Führer. And I say Führer as in the grand leader, COVID fascist, Fauci. So Führer Fauci, and how he fared today in his Senate hearing. And he wanted the spotlight. He wanted to be a celebrity. Well, you've got it now. And you're going to get a lot more spotlight. So we will continue hammering away, because you hammered away at our lives, at our freedoms. You essentially, for whatever reasons, seemingly was out to destroy the world. So you destroy the Beagles, you destroy America as we know it, and take away our liberties, our freedoms, and make up phony Fauci rules that are not based in science, when after the true scientists that actually were saving people, that were helping people, because you and Big Pharma and Bill Gates and the medical monopoly decided to do things your way and not the right way. Right back, hold tight. Tom Donahue, Truth Matters. Welcome back, Tom Donahue, Truth Matters, and it really does. I want to stay on the subject of Hannity, and I've come up with or coined another nickname, another name tag, and that is Hannity Hack. And so I said, well, you know, there are multiple definitions of hack, but I wanted to focus on if you're referring to someone's work or body of work being a hack. And looking at definitions, it says lack of originality. They copy popular trends, use tired cliches, and reuse old ideas instead of creating fresh and honest material. Well, I've always said he was one of the most unoriginal talk show hosts, that he is a repeater, so repetitive. He's not eloquent. He's not highly educated. He's a hard worker, and he's ingratiated himself with the power structure, and early on in his career through Rush Limbaugh, and it served him well. And he's been a dutiful, loyal servant to Rupert Murdoch, earlier Roger Ailes. And Premier Radio Network Clear Channel just continues to push him out there because these are stations that are owned primarily. But if you look at the majority of his stations, they are iHeart, which is Premier Radio Networks, which goes back to Clear Channel. Did he earn each and every one of those stations? No. Many of the syndicated hosts do not earn those stations. They are awarded those stations by virtue of the company they work for. If a company owns hundreds of stations, which they do, and the logical thing is at that time slot, you're going to put your guy or gal in that slot on that station, those multiple stations. And that's how when Hannity or when Rush was around and they'd say, we're on 600 stations. And I think Hannity's now claiming 700. It might be. I doubt that he could have or would have earned 70. That's just my view. And I'm holding to it. Now, Michael Savage used to refer to Hannity as the wall banger because he was in construction, and I don't think he got past high school unless he took a course or two in college. And with Michael Savage being so articulate and eloquent and highly educated and very talented, there's just no comparison. And so I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed Savage going after Levin, and I think that he always got the best of Levin. So Hannity the hack, he's just a hack for hire. Yeah, so Hannity's a hack for hire, and that's why it was so easy for Trump to lasso him in and Bibi to lasso him in, Murdoch and Ailes. He'll challenge in terms of rhetorical arguments with Democrats and liberals, and he's got that playbook down. Not very original. He followed Rush like a media puppy dog. It was the same rhetorical arguments. It was the same topics. So he was basically a mima bird, a repeater. And that's what he built his career on. But I remember I posted a couple news headlines several years back where even Trump kind of jokingly kind of scolded and dressed down Hannity for being such a lapdog, and being in someone that was so subservient. And I don't have those headlines directly at my access, but it was really funny. And it's in one of my podcasts. If you go back in time, if you see the word Hannity, you'll probably find it. It was hilarious. Trump essentially just said that he's not going to challenge anything he says or does. And let's put it this way. Hannity is not the highest rated show on Fox. He never has been. I mean, the goofy show, The Five, is actually the number one show on Fox News, which is a horrible show, but that's just, the way I see it. And then, and Jesse, his show is really not that popular considering it is in the prime spot. I mean, that's where Bill O'Reilly was, and he's never reached O'Reilly's numbers. He never reached Tucker's numbers. And Laura, let me pivot a little bit here on Laura. Laura attended the Fauci hearing. Part of it was the fact that she was under attack, and I have to give her a lot of credit. She did a fantastic job talking about alternative treatments during COVID, and she would have on a lot of truly well-informed guests, in particular many doctors, alternative doctors, that were challenging the orthodoxy and the established narrative about COVID and the treatments. Yeah, so Laura Ingram's show is actually called the Ingram Angle. And she had a segment, which was very good and very accurate for the most part. It was called The Medicine Cabinet. I have to give her a lot of credit. Now, I don't believe that her show, because they have studios in different parts. I think that she still remained in the DC, Virginia area for her show. So I don't know if she, like many of those that were living in New York, Fox actually imposed the Trump, Biden, Fauci mandates of getting the shots in order to work and be in the general public. And, so many of those hosts complied. Now, again, I'm not here to judge people because their employment or the government or through travel, they made a decision based on their circumstances, based on their obligations. And I was fortunate enough, working from home, that yes, living in Philadelphia, the so-called cradle of liberty, that I was confronted in terms of restaurants and stores and transportation and I wore the mask only so I wouldn't offend anyone else. I used it strategically to just get in and out of stores and in and out of transit without conflict. But to me, I knew it was like going to a masquerade ball. It was a costume, and I knew that it was highly ineffective. But I wasn't going to get into public confrontations about it. And if you listen to my show during the pandemic, I refused, for health reasons, for spiritual reasons, to allow for that jab. I did not take any shots, the shots or the boosters. And I've never taken flu shots, and I never will. So, and I never caught COVID. I took vitamins, certain supplements, and ate really healthy, and I have air purifiers. But other than that, I just think my immune system was strong enough to ward off any pathogens or contagions that may have existed. But no, I never contracted COVID. And I was one of the few in my circle that, and I tell people, I'd say, if you don't want me to visit for dinner, or you don't want me to come over, I wasn't out to offend anybody. If they wanted my opinion or my nutritional research, I shared it, but I just did not. And you can go back to prior podcasts of mine around that time. And I actually did shows talking about supplements and various strategies, alternatively that you could employ that could be helpful. But I never judged anyone. But I did judge the hypocrites that pretended and they would talk big on the air. And then also then when they were forced, when they had to admit that they took the shot, and Trump was one of them. Trump was with Bill O'Reilly. This is when he was out of office, and they were doing this. I forget what they called the tour, but you had to buy tickets, and O'Reilly spoke, and he spoke, and they took questions, and I remember seeing the clip where they were asking about the pandemic, and they were asking about the shots, and Bill O'Reilly, of course, took the shots, and he turned to then he said, "Mr. President," he said, you helped with Operation Warp Speed, so you took the shots, right? And the boosters." And Trump, he looked shocked that he had to actually answer that question. He never talked about if he took it, even though he pushed it on us through Warp Speed. And also he was in Fauci's corner for the longest time. So Trump begrudgingly had to, with the audience already starting to boo, O'Reilly said, "Of course you took it." And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "And boosters." Trump was trying to play it both ways, that he was part of Operation, he created Operation Warp Speed. He would have the press conferences with, the scarf lady and the COVID fascist, Führer Fauci. And then he kind of soured on him over time. But that was the same way he was with Comey and others that just stayed within his ranks, much too long. He did start to sour. But, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, he made all the right moves, kept the schools open, didn't mandate hardly anything. He pushed back from the feds. Remember, Trump was involved in, they shut everything down, and they had all kinds of lockdown procedures for a couple of weeks. Trump was involved with that. Now, Trump didn't want to go for anything extended periods. And then the amount of debt that the government accrued when they did all the payouts or the payoffs. But, Trump might want to try to separate himself from Fauci, although he said today, and let me get the exact wording of the pardon that Fauci was given by Biden, because remember, Biden did a blanket pardon on many of his people in his cabinet and that served him and Fauci as well. But Trump said he respects, this is the word he said, he respects Biden's pardon of Fauci and the power of the pardon, which is the most powerful thing, he said, that a president can have. And we can see how he and Biden exercised their pardon power, which is totally corrupted. So Trump had no problems with, and part of the reason he didn't have a problem with the Biden blanket pardon is because he's going to do the same thing. And he's pardoned all kinds of people around him already. And of course, a lot of the J6ers, and, we can go on and on, but a lot of controversial pardons from Trump, people seem to overlook. But yeah, so back to Laura Ingraham, her medical cabinet and all the special guests she had, she did some good work. And there were a lot of podcasters and YouTubers and social media influencers that stayed steady and strong, even with all the strikes against them, through social media before Musk took over and bought X. But it was a very difficult period. Laura Ingraham's known as a diva behind the scenes, but that's a whole other story for another day. But the fact of the matter is that, she has done some good work in talk radio. She's done some good work at Fox News. And I know privately from, we know from some of the text messaging, with the computer software companies, the voting machine companies, Dominion and Smartmatic, that was able to access. And then just knowing that she's a highly educated woman, Dartmouth and University of Virginia, that, she just looks at Trump with absolute total disdain. But, she fakes it. And Megyn Kelly faked it. Remember, she did her reverse role and was on stage during the final days of the 24 campaign. But down deep, these people do not respect and they do not like Trump. But people, gravitate towards power and influence and having that access and opportunity. And I just don't roll that way, and I just never will. So anyway, that is more information that pertains to Fauci, the media, in particular talk radio, and its coverage. And we're going to, in a final segment, we're going to get to more specifics as it relates to Führer Fauci, the COVID fascist. And I don't think he liked the spotlight, at least this kind of spotlight, which was the interrogation spotlight that rained down on him in the United States Senate. And so glad that finally, even if it's just reputationally, he's having to face the music. So the final segment for this week. And I'm going to do a quick review of more on Fauci, the Senate hearing. As most of you are fully aware, Fauci pled the fifth, and he looked very scared. And I have to say that some of the Republican senators really stood out in terms of standing up for the American people. I hearken back to the heartache and the hardships that were experienced during that period of time that was completely unnecessary in terms of lockdowns and the unmitigated gall of the government and the medical monopoly to impose their will. And I mentioned earlier that I didn't take the jab. I was personally against it. And I mentioned for health and spiritual reasons, but also personal liberty, which I wanted to reinforce. So they're the three prominent reasons that I refused and did not buckle, did not waver, did not falter. And so I never caught COVID, and I remained healthy. And of course, I won't have to endure the side effects from the jab, from the COVID shot. So there'll be no bodily pollution and toxicity that I will have to endure from the shot or from the boosters. And I worry for so many that did take the shot and the boosters. Now, Fauci, besides his defiant, cowardly actions taken, now, if you are already pardoned, the only thing you have to worry about is committing perjury in your testimony, because you're not going to be charged with crimes relating to COVID because Biden pardoned you, at least at the federal level. So this was a cowardly act. And he had said earlier that he would testify under oath. And I saw the video footage where he said that anytime, any place, based on his conduct and his recommendations and his service. Well, that all changed. Now, there is a senator that stands out to me, He's a Republican from Ohio, Senator Bernie Moreno. Now, Moreno lobbed an expletive at Fauci. Well, he's lucky that something more severe wasn't hurled at him. And with everything that we had to experience through the pandemic, lockdown, shutdown, regulation, Big Brother and Big Pharma interference in our lives, and that doesn't even talk about the social media, the deplatforming, the strikes, the extreme ultra censorship. So this senator said that what motivated him to become a senator was because he was at a football game and because a woman that attended the game was ushered out because she didn't have a mask. So keep that in mind when you hear the media talk about, because here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later. So who the F do you think you were for doing that? Now, there's a time and a place, and like I say, I try to avoid, and certainly on the air, using foul language. But if I were one of those senators, based on what Fauci, the high crimes against humanity that he's committed, in my view, and for all the heartache and the hardships that he played a crucial role in, to be able to confront him without violence, exacting revenge, to just use the F word in that context, this is a rare exception. I kind of like it, Now, the pious handler of Trump, who never seems to mind Trump's vulgarity, took issue with that. Yeah, so Levin had an issue with that. He agreed with Dana Bash. Now, you know that these media people, their language is atrocious. And again, I can't speak for Levin, but if Levin is concerned about language, why don't you address your client, the president, Trump, because there's a whole lot of vulgarity there, This is a rare exception for me to say, attaboy. Rand Paul did an exquisite job of documenting factually, rationally what transpired. And that diary is so indicting of this celebrity seeking, this, in many ways, reminds me of Trump in terms of wanting all the prizes, the recognition, the praise, the adulation. So well over 100 times he pled the fifth. He's going to be held in contempt. At least that's what the Senate's going to vote on. Can't imagine him not being held in contempt. But Fauci solicited award nominations, prize profits from NIH-funded scientists. So he was seeking more fame, more fortune during this health crisis. His actions. I just have to wonder if this man has a conscience, if he's going to ever take accountability for what he has done. And I doubt he will. And the liberal press, the mainstream press, is still trying to defend him and think that he was unfairly attacked. Well, just read his diary. Seriously. But Trump respecting the pardon for Fauci and looking back this whole situation, Trump gave him an award. Trump had opportunities to fire him, replace him, demote him, to denounce him during his first term, and he didn't do it. Fauci didn't retire till 2022, so he stayed on with Biden. I believe it was around 2 years. So all through the Trump administration, and baton was passed, and he continued on in the Biden administration. So if Trump had gotten him out of there, now I'm sure Biden would have had someone, equally, but I don't know for sure, probably deleterious to the nation's health. But what this man has done, this sinister and sadistic scientist, mad scientist, has done, he should be brought up. And my understanding is that Florida's already started an investigation. He can be charged at the state level. So we'll have to see what happens there. Some folks out there respect and like Stephen Miller. I think he's a creep. I think he has had Trump do things that I think that pushed him, just like he got pushed into the war. some of the ICE missteps and some other things that have been done on trade. And I think that Stephen Miller's had a ominous effect and impact on the administration. Well, he and his wife, Katie, who does a little podcast, insist that Fauci was not their friend, as the diary indicates, and reveals numerous pandemic phone calls for advice. Now, again, this is rewriting history, but Katie and Stephen Miller were close to Fauci. Matter of fact, she worked on the COVID. Katie Miller was a spokesperson for the White House coronavirus task force that began as she served Vice President Pence as press secretary. So this was not just in its official capacity, although she did work with him, but these were many, many calls seeking out his advice. And now they're saying he should go to jail. He should be prosecuted. Yeah, right. So many of these people that behind the scenes operate and have connections and communications, but then when the S hits the fan, then all of a sudden they create a sanitized version. They reverse themselves. They give a false picture or narrative as to what really transpired. So again, it's hypocrisy to the extreme. So I was glad that also came out. But it's just amazing. I mean, we're going to have like the Epstein files. We're going to have the Fauci files that include the diary. And we got to find out all the participants that worked with Fauci, that created and undermined the health of our country and the world, and put all of our lives at risk. And our liberties were certainly impacted and injured. And we talked about so many other things that Fauci is responsible for. But Trump is not holding Fauci accountable. He said that he had no problem with the pardon. It didn't fire him, didn't demote him, didn't take away his award. He hasn't done anything to sanction China or hold China responsible. So it's Rand Paul that keeps pushing towards the truth all along. And DeSantis, who the governor, operated in the best interests of the citizens of Florida and try to shed a light on things. But Trump is a co-conspirator in this, whether you want to accept that or not, because Operation Warp Speed is Trump's doing. And Fauci was front and center at these press conferences where Trump attended many, many times, very attentive and interactive with these made-for-TV soap operas. And that's what they were. They very little included the truth and reality-based. We'll continue reporting on these things. And I did many, many podcasts relating to these issues in the past. So you can go back to TomDonnieReports.com. Till we meet again, stay healthy.